The gunshot exploded through the empty parking garage. Emily Carter flinched so hard she nearly dropped her purse. Three masked men stepped from behind concrete pillars, their pistols aimed directly at her. She backed away until her shoulders hit a parked yellow taxi. The driver climbed out slowly. No panic, no fear, just a tired sigh. "Leave her," he said quietly. The tallest gunman laughed. "You picked the wrong woman to protect." Emily grabbed the driver's arm. "Please, don't. They'll kill you." Instead of answering, the driver looked at the men. His voice turned cold. "I said leave." The tallest gunman raised his weapon. Then he noticed the driver's face. Everything changed. His smile disappeared. His hands started shaking. He whispered one word. "Boss." The other two immediately lowered their guns. Fear spread across their faces. Not fear of the police. Fear of the man standing beside Emily. She stared at the taxi driver in disbelief. "Boss, who exactly had been driving her home every night?" To answer that, we have to go back 6 months. Emily's days always began before sunrise. She worked double shifts at a small neighborhood diner, smiling through exhaustion because every extra dollar meant another day her mother could afford treatment. Dreams were expensive. Hospital bills were even more expensive. Still, she carried one dream close to her heart. One day, she wanted to own a tiny bakery filled with warm bread, cinnamon rolls, and laughter. No violence, no greed, just peace. Every night, after closing the diner, the same yellow taxi waited outside. Its driver never seemed in a hurry. He never complained about the late hour. He simply smiled. "Home." Emily nodded. His name, he said, was Daniel. He looked ordinary. Plain clothes, a quiet voice, kind eyes that seemed to carry more sadness than sleep. He never flirted, never pried. Some nights they drove in silence. Other nights they talked about books, old movies, and childhood memories. Emily didn't realize those conversations became the favorite part of Daniel's day. Because Daniel wasn't really Daniel. His real name was Adrian Moretti, a name that made powerful men whisper. A name linked to an empire built on fear. Every politician knew it. Every criminal feared it. Every police detective chased it. Yet every evening, the city's most dangerous mafia boss left behind armored SUVs, private security, and luxury penthouses to drive an old taxi through ordinary streets. No one in his organization understood why. The answer began months before he met Emily. He had watched from inside his car as a frightened little boy ran into traffic after dropping a bag of groceries. Without hesitation, Emily threw herself into the street, shielding the child with her own body. She wasn't rewarded. She wasn't filmed. She simply made sure the boy was safe and walked away with scraped hands and torn clothes. Most people protected themselves. Emily protected strangers. Adrian couldn't stop thinking about it. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, she wanted nothing. And that terrified him more than any rival ever had. From there, the story only became more dangerous. Every ride drew them closer. Every conversation made Adrian question the life he had built. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else had begun watching the yellow taxi. The war he thought he controlled was already moving toward the woman who had unknowingly captured his heart. From there, the story only became more dangerous. Every ride drew them closer. Every conversation made Adrian question the life he had built. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else had begun watching the yellow taxi. Emily soon noticed something strange about Daniel. No matter what neighborhood she visited, no matter how rough the streets became, trouble seemed to disappear the moment his taxi arrived. One rainy evening, a group of drunken men surrounded the cab after mistaking Emily for someone else. Before she could react, the men glanced through the driver's window. Their confidence vanished. Without saying a word, they backed away and disappeared into the rain. Emily frowned. That was weird. Daniel simply shrugged. Some people know when they're making a mistake. She laughed. You always have mysterious answers. If only she knew. What Emily never saw were the silent messages Adrian received every few minutes. Boss, the East District shipment is waiting. Boss, the council meeting starts in 20 minutes. Boss, the Romano family crossed our border. He ignored them all until after he dropped her home. His empire was beginning to notice. Inside Moretti headquarters, whispers spread through marble hallways. Their fearless leader disappeared every night. Nobody knew where. Nobody dared ask. Except one man, Victor Salazar. Adrian's oldest friend, his most trusted lieutenant. Victor had stood beside Adrian through wars, betrayals, and impossible decisions. But lately, he saw something dangerous. Hope. You've changed, Victor said one evening. Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. People change. Not men like us. Silence. Victor leaned forward. Who is she? Adrian looked out the window. Someone who deserves a better world than the one I built. Victor's expression hardened. Then stay away from her. Meanwhile, Emily's own life grew harder. Her mother's treatments became more expensive. The landlord threatened eviction. The diner cut employee hours. For the first time in years, Emily wondered if dreams were only for people born into better lives. One night, during their usual ride, Daniel noticed the tears she was trying to hide. Bad day. She smiled weakly. I'll survive. No. She looked at him. You always say you'll survive. A long pause. But when was the last time someone asked if you were okay? Emily couldn't answer. Instead, she cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to let months of exhaustion finally escape. Daniel didn't offer empty promises. He simply parked beside a quiet river overlooking the city lights. They sat there in silence. Sometimes kindness doesn't need words. That night, Emily realized she trusted this quiet taxi driver more than anyone else. Weeks passed. Autumn painted the city gold. Their conversations grew longer. She told him about her late father teaching her to bake bread. He admitted he had forgotten what peace felt like. She laughed at terrible jokes. He smiled more than he had in years. For a man feared by thousands, one woman's laugh became more valuable than power. Without Emily knowing, Adrian quietly began changing her future. Using anonymous companies, he purchased the abandoned bakery she had admired for years. He paid off hidden debts attached to the property. He arranged for renovations to begin. Every document led back to fake investors. No one could trace it to him, especially not Emily. He wanted her dream to come true. He never wanted her to feel indebted. But happiness has a way of attracting danger. Across the city, the Romano crime family noticed something unusual. Their spies tracked Adrian's movements. Every evening, the same route, the same yellow taxi, the same young waitress. One photograph changed everything. Emily Carter had unknowingly become the weakest point in the strongest man's armor. And in the criminal world, love was never seen as a blessing. It was a weapon. One cold evening, Daniel arrived later than usual. Emily climbed inside with crossed arms. You're 7 minutes late. I know. You've never been late. I had work. She smiled. You should find a better boss. For the first time, Adrian almost laughed. If only it were that simple. She studied him. You know? What? I don't even know your last name. He hesitated. For a dangerous man, answering that simple question felt impossible. Daniel. He stopped. Cole. The lie came too easily. Emily accepted it without question. But Adrian hated himself for speaking it. Because every mile they drove together made the truth heavier. And lies always demand a price. Winter arrived quietly, covering the city in icy rain and gray skies. But for Emily, life had begun to feel brighter. Not because her problems had disappeared. Her mother's treatments were still expensive. Bills still arrived faster than paychecks. The future was still uncertain. The difference was simple. Every night, she knew someone would be waiting outside the diner. The old yellow taxi. The quiet driver. Daniel. One evening, Emily walked outside expecting to see the familiar cab. Instead, she found only an empty parking space. She checked her phone. No message. No missed call. Nothing. For reasons she couldn't explain, disappointment settled deep in her chest. Just as she turned to leave, headlights swept across the street. The taxi pulled up. Daniel stepped out. His left hand was wrapped in fresh bandages. Emily's smile disappeared. What happened? He looked at the bandage before answering. Car trouble. She raised an eyebrow. Your car bites. He couldn't help smiling. It was a stubborn repair. The truth was far darker. Just 2 hours earlier, Adrian had survived an ambush by a rival crime family. 3 attackers never made it home. Emily would never know. At least, that was his plan. As the weeks passed, little details began to trouble her. Daniel always seemed to know when traffic accidents happened before they reached them. He never used GPS, yet he knew every shortcut in the city. Police officers often nodded respectfully at him. Street criminals looked away whenever his taxi passed. It didn't make sense. One afternoon, Emily met her co-worker Sarah for coffee. You know that taxi driver you keep talking about? Sarah asked. Emily smiled. What about him? I've seen him somewhere before. Probably driving. Sarah slowly shook her head. No, it was on the news. Emily laughed. I think you'd remember if my taxi driver was famous. Sarah wasn't convinced. That same evening, Victor entered Adrian's office carrying a folder. I know everything. Adrian looked up. You've been following me. I had to. Victor placed several photographs on the desk. Emily laughing inside the taxi. Emily hugging Daniel goodbye. Emily resting asleep against the window during a late-night ride. Victor's expression was grim. You've fallen in love. Silence filled the room. Adrian didn't deny it. Victor sighed. Then you've already lost. Adrian stood. I won't let anyone hurt her. You don't get to decide that anymore. Victor leaned closer. Our enemies already know she exists. Those words struck harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, the great Adrian Moretti was afraid. Not for himself. For her. That night, he parked outside Emily's apartment as usual. She climbed into the taxi with her usual smile. But something was different. Daniel barely spoke. Everything okay? She asked. I'm just tired. You've been tired for weeks. He forced a smile. I'm fine. She looked out the window. You know? What? I've started looking forward to these rides more than going home. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. She had no idea how much those words meant, or how impossible they made his next decision. When the taxi stopped outside her building, Emily hesitated before opening the door. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? The question hung in the air. Adrian closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Every instinct told him to say yes. Every lesson his violent life had taught him screamed no. But for once, his heart won. I'd like that. Emily smiled brighter than he had ever seen. Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Inside, someone lifted a camera. Click. One photograph. That single image would soon ignite a war. Their first dinner felt surprisingly ordinary. A small Italian restaurant. Simple food. Soft music. Emily talked about her dream bakery. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When the waiter accidentally spilled water across the table, Daniel apologized before the young man even had the chance. Emily laughed. You apologize for everything. I've spent a lifetime making mistakes. She reached across the table. I don't think you're as broken as you believe. For a moment, Adrian forgot who he was. He wasn't a mafia boss. He wasn't a man with enemies. He was simply a man sitting across from the woman he loved. And that illusion almost convinced him it could last. The next morning, reality returned. Victor entered his office without knocking. The Romano family made their move. He tossed another photograph onto the desk. It was Emily leaving the restaurant. They know exactly who she is. Adrian's face hardened. What do they want? Victor answered quietly. You. That evening, Adrian never arrived outside the diner. Nor the next night. Or the night after. Emily waited. Then waited longer. Eventually, another taxi took her home. She stared out the window, wondering what she'd done wrong. Days turned into weeks. No calls. No explanation. No goodbye. She convinced herself Daniel had simply changed his mind. Maybe she'd imagined the connection. Maybe she had cared more than he did. She cried exactly once. Then she forced herself to move on. Miles away, Adrian watched from inside a black SUV as she walked home alone. His hands trembled. Leaving her was the hardest decision he'd ever made. But he believed distance was the only way to keep her alive. He didn't know someone much closer had already sealed her fate. Victor, the man Adrian trusted more than anyone. He had made a choice. Convinced that Emily would always be Adrian's greatest weakness, Victor secretly contacted the Romano family. He offered them something priceless. Emily Carter's location. Not because he hated Adrian. Because he believed sacrificing one innocent life would save the empire they had built together. It was the greatest betrayal Adrian would ever face. And Emily had no idea she had just become the target of every gun in the city. The storm was no longer coming. It had already arrived. Emily tried to convince herself that life had simply moved on. She stopped looking for the yellow taxi. She stopped checking every passing cab. She even accepted extra shifts at the diner just to keep herself too busy to think. But some absences don't fade. They echo. Every quiet ride home reminded her of the man who had vanished without a goodbye. 3 weeks later, the diner closed later than usual. Rain poured from the dark sky. Emily wrapped her coat tightly around herself and started. walking toward the bus stop. Halfway down the empty street, a black SUV rolled silently beside her. Another blocked the road ahead. Before she could turn around, two men stepped out. Emily Carter? She backed away. Who are you? One of the men smiled. We're here because someone misses you. She turned to run. A gloved hand covered her mouth. Within seconds, the street was empty again. Only the rain remained. Across town, Adrian sat in the middle of a meeting with the heads of his organization. A young guard burst through the doors. Boss. Every conversation stopped. What is it? The guard struggled to catch his breath. Emily Carter has been taken. The room fell silent. For a heartbeat, Adrian didn't move. Then the crystal glass in his hand shattered. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the polished table. No one dared speak. They had all seen Adrian angry before. They had never seen him afraid. Who? He asked quietly. The Romano family. Adrian's eyes slowly turned toward Victor. Neither man spoke. Neither had to. One look was enough. Adrian understood. Only a handful of people had known Emily's location. Victor lowered his eyes. That was all the confirmation Adrian needed. You betrayed me. Victor didn't deny it. I betrayed one woman to save thousands of men. You sold an innocent life. I saved the empire. Adrian slammed both hands onto the table. There is no empire if we become monsters. The room froze. Victor shook his head. You stopped thinking like a leader the day you fell in love. Adrian's voice became frighteningly calm. I stopped thinking like a criminal. Without another word, he walked out. Every soldier in the room followed him. Not Victor. Adrian. For the first time in years, loyalty had shifted. The Romano family had chosen an abandoned steel warehouse on the edge of the harbor. A place with only one entrance. Snipers on the roof. Armed guards inside. A perfect trap. When Adrian's convoy arrived, his men prepared for battle. He raised a hand. No. His captain frowned. Boss. I go in alone. That's suicide. If they see an army, Emily dies first. He stepped out of the car. No body armor. No helmet. Only a black suit and the quiet confidence of a man with nothing left to lose. The warehouse doors creaked open. Inside, dozens of armed men waited. At the far end of the room, Emily sat tied to a chair. Her face lit up with hope. Daniel. The entire warehouse erupted in laughter. One of the Romano leaders smiled cruelly. Daniel. He looked at Adrian. So that's the name you used. Emily stared in confusion. What are they talking about? The man walked toward her. Your taxi driver isn't Daniel. He turned to Adrian with a mocking bow. Allow me to introduce Adrian Moretti. Emily felt the world stop. No. She whispered. No. The room grew silent. The Romano boss laughed. The most feared man in this city. Drove you home every night. Emily looked at Adrian. Every memory flashed through her mind. The strange respect from criminals. The mysterious disappearances. The bruises. The lies. You lied to me. Adrian didn't look away. Yes. Who are you? My real name is Adrian Moretti. Are you? She couldn't finish the sentence. He answered anyway. Everything you've heard about me. Tears filled her eyes. So none of it was real? His voice cracked for the first time. You were the only real thing in my life. The Romano leader clapped slowly. Touching. He pulled out a pistol and pointed it at Emily's head. Here's our offer. You surrender your empire. Or she dies. Every gun in the warehouse turned toward Adrian. Seconds passed. Then Adrian did something no one expected. He removed the ring that symbolized his authority as head of the Moretti family. He placed it on the floor. I'll give you everything. His own men, watching through hidden cameras outside, were stunned. The most powerful mafia boss in the city was willing to lose everything for one woman. The Romano leader smiled. I knew love would make you weak. He reached down to pick up the ring. The moment his eyes left Adrian, it was over. In one explosive movement, Adrian struck. The gun flew across the room. Emily dropped to the floor as chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse. Smoke filled the air. Men shouted. Glass shattered. Adrian fought with the precision of someone who had survived a lifetime of violence, not because he enjoyed it, but because he'd had to. He reached Emily first, cutting the ropes around her wrists. Can you run? She nodded through tears. Stay behind me. Together, they pushed toward the exit as Adrian's men stormed the building. Within minutes, the Romano operation collapsed. The survivors surrendered. The war that had haunted the city for years ended in a single night. Outside, Sirens echoed in the distance. Emily stood in the rain, staring at Adrian. He was bleeding from a wound on his shoulder. She barely noticed. All she could see was the man she trusted, and the stranger standing before her. "You could have told me. I know. I asked you who you were. I know. You looked me in the eyes and lied. I know." There was nothing left to defend. No excuses. No clever explanation. Only the truth. "I wanted one part of my life to be clean," Adrian said quietly. "You made me remember who I was before all of this." Emily's tears mixed with the rain. "I don't even know if I know you anymore." Adrian nodded slowly. "You finally do." He turned away without asking her to forgive him, without asking her to stay. Because love built on honesty couldn't begin with another plea. As the police lights grew brighter in the distance, Adrian walked toward the waiting officers. For the first time in decades, he didn't run. He was done hiding. And for Emily, the hardest choice was still ahead. The flashing blue and red lights painted the harbor in restless colors. Emily watched as Adrian walked forward with his hands visible, refusing to hide behind his men. The officers surrounded him cautiously. They had spent years trying to catch Adrian Moretti. Yet the man standing before them wasn't fighting. He wasn't threatening anyone. He simply looked tired. Before stepping into the police vehicle, Adrian turned toward his captain. "In my office," he said calmly. "There's a safe behind the bookshelf." The captain nodded. "Inside are ledgers, account numbers, and the names of every official we've bribed." The captain stared at him in disbelief. "Burn them." Adrian slowly shook his head. "No. Give them to the authorities." Even his own men looked stunned. The empire that had taken decades to build was ending with a single sentence. Adrian climbed into the vehicle without another word. Emily stood frozen. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to scream. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Who are you?" For the first time, she wasn't asking about the Mafia boss. She was asking about the man who had chosen to lose everything. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. News channels exploded with the story. The fall of Adrian Moretti. Authorities uncovered hidden financial records. Corrupt officials were arrested. Several rival crime families collapsed without Adrian's network protecting them. People argued over who he really was. Some called him a ruthless criminal finally facing justice. Others claimed he had prevented an even bloodier war among rival syndicates. Emily ignored all of it. Television could describe the Mafia boss. It couldn't explain the man who had waited outside a diner every night just to make sure she got home safely. Months passed. Spring slowly replaced winter. Emily's mother grew stronger. Her treatments finally began to work. One afternoon, Emily received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a single key, a folded document, and one handwritten note. Dreams shouldn't disappear because of someone else's mistakes. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Adrian. Confused, she followed the address printed on the document. When she arrived, she stopped walking. It was the abandoned bakery she'd admired for years. Only now, it wasn't abandoned. Fresh paint covered the walls. New ovens gleamed through the front windows. The sign above the entrance was still blank, waiting for its owner. The paperwork listed only one name: Emily Carter. The building belonged to her. Paid in full. No loans. No debts. No hidden conditions. Tears filled her eyes. She finally understood why Adrian had always asked about her dream in such detail. He hadn't just listened. He had quietly built a future he never expected to share. Emily opened the bakery 3 months later. It wasn't grand. It wasn't famous. But every morning, the smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. Neighbors smiled. Children pressed their faces against the display window. For the first time in years, Emily felt like her life belonged to her again. Still, every evening around closing time, her eyes wandered toward the road. Old habits are difficult to forget. Nearly a year after the night at the harbor, a familiar engine stopped outside. Emily looked up. A yellow taxi. Older now. The paint slightly faded. The driver's door opened. Adrian stepped out. He looked different. No expensive suits. No bodyguards. No armed convoy. Just a simple jacket and tired eyes that somehow seemed lighter than before. Emily walked outside. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. "I made parole 6 months ago." She nodded. "I heard. I wasn't sure if I should come." "You almost didn't." He smiled faintly. "I almost turned around 3 times." She laughed softly despite herself. Some things hadn't changed. I sold everything that was left, Adrian said. The houses, the businesses, the cars. The money went to victim compensation funds. Emily searched his face. And now, he glanced at the taxi. I bought back the only thing that ever made me feel honest. The taxi. He nodded. It turns out I'm a decent driver. She smiled. You always were. Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable, just honest. At last, Adrian looked directly into her eyes. My name is Adrian Moretti. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. I don't expect another chance. Again, she nodded. I know. He took a slow breath. But I promised myself that if I ever saw you again, there would be no lies. Emily studied him for a long time. The man before her wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't hiding behind the name Daniel. He wasn't hiding behind power. For the first time, she could see every scar he had tried so hard to bury. She stepped closer. Can I ask you one question? Anything. When you first picked me up, was any of it real? Adrian answered without hesitation. The only lie was my name. I looked forward to every ride, every conversation, every laugh. I fell in love with you somewhere. Between your stories about baking bread and your terrible singing. Emily covered her face as tears escaped. You heard that. I heard all of it. And you still came back? I drive 1,000 miles just to hear you sing off-key again. She laughed through her tears. For the first time in over a year, the weight between them began to lift. Emily looked at the taxi, then back at Adrian. So, he waited. Are you working? He blinked in confusion. What? She pointed toward the driver's seat. If you're on duty, I'd like a ride home. His eyes widened. Just a ride. She smiled. We'll see where the road goes. Adrian opened the passenger door with the same quiet respect he had shown on the very first night they met. Emily climbed inside. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, a future to earn, one honest day at a time. But this time, there were no false names, no hidden empires, no dangerous secrets waiting around the next corner. Only two people, a yellow taxi, and a road that finally belonged to them both. The city lights stretched ahead as the cab disappeared into the night, not as the escape vehicle of a feared mafia boss, but as the beginning of two ordinary lives that had fought through extraordinary darkness to find each other. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't risking your life for someone. Sometimes it's becoming the person they always believed you could be. The end.